So we have created very specific talks for this weekend, and we have for the first talk of this weekend, Carl H. Smith. He's professor in the University of East London, and he is teaching transmedia, and he is a fascinating person who has been on the cutting edge of consciousness research in application for technology and education. Perfect. And he's a really good friend of mine as well. We've been together collaborating for 10 years, and we've been exploring this intersection between how technology can alter consciousness and how can it become instrumental in the development of human consciousness. So he's going to be exploring hyperhuman techniques and technologies for regeneration, achieving altered trace of consciousness. So give it up for Carl H. Smith.
Thank you, Jose. Fantastic intro. Thank you so much for being here, for taking the time out, and I hope to entertain you. Just a disclaimer at the beginning, a lot of this is very much my own experience. I speak a lot in metaphor, so I hope that you take a lot of it like in that sense, and also try and go and get your own experience to try and validate some of my research findings. The structure of the talk today is going to be, we're talking about hyperhumanism. What is it? Then we're going to have a bit of a perception primer. What is perception? What are our limits of perception? Then we're going to talk about endotechnologies. Endotechnologies are our own internal technologies that we can use without any external technology required. Then we're going to talk about NN-DMT, DMT Extended, and also DMT Island, which is a new project that I'll tell you about. Then we're going to talk about a journaling practice, which is very structured. I don't know how many of you journal, but I'm going to talk a lot about my journaling practice for the last 30 years. Then we're going to move on to AI, cyberdelics, and technology. And then we'll talk about sound and the art of imprinting, Umwelt hacking. How many people have heard of Umwelt? Of course you have, Lucas. So a few of you. We'll talk about what Umwelt means, and then have some closing thoughts. So let's start with defining human. So it means to look up. In Greek, anthropos means to look up. And my general sensation over the last few years, 5 years, I've been really exploring hyperhumanism as kind of a resistance to transhumanism. That's pretty fundamental in this idea that we've taken the humanity out of the human. And I argue actually that we're not human yet, that we've only just sort of scratched the surface of what it means to be human. And a lot of our technologies are atrophying our abilities, our analog abilities, our abilities to be present, our abilities to be here, right? To be here and in this communitas. And I think it's fantastic we don't have internet. A lot of us are completely here, right? We're not totally distracted all the time. So how do we return or even arrive at this full dynamic range of what it means to be human? And I think the potential is hyper. And I've thought a lot about the term hyper, and I'll talk to you about the different types of humanism that exist. But we need to be fully invested, not just individually, but we have to look at this as a community project, as a collective project, with our body, mind, and time energy. I'm going to talk about time energy. I think it's a fantastic term from Theory Underground. American blue-collar workers who are philosophers came up with this term, time energy. And I think it's really important that we understand that we may have the time, but not the energy. And we're all sold this illusion of, let's work for 60 years straight, and then we'll have 10 years at the end when we don't have the energy to spend the money that we've earned over the 60 years. So it's a complete systemic, problematic way of looking at reality, I would argue. So humanism, let's start with humanism. I think there's lots of problems with humanism. Humanism put us as an apex creature at the top of the pyramid, saying that we're the most important species, we're the most important thing in the planet. Therefore, we can utilize the resources as if they're our own. Our God-given right is to just basically harvest all the resources and all the animals. And you can see that's kind of come to pass, right? We're destroying so much of the ecosystem. And the biodiversity is incredible how much the human has to answer for in terms of that arrogance. Where it's much more like this, I would argue, that we're in this nested ecology and we're dependent on the little things beneath us and everything above us. So it's, You know, Einstein said if the bees get wiped out, then we as humanity have 5-6 years left as a result. So there's loads of different kingdoms as well. It's really important to understand that we are not just human. 50% of us is bacteria, and we're covered in fungi. So we're kind of already, we're kind of a nested ecology ourselves, right? It's important that people don't kind of forget that. We can become very human-centric. So we've got the plant kingdom. The fungi kingdom was something that, you know, considered plants until they realized fungi is its own kingdom. And you could argue the fungi kingdom is far more intelligent than the human kingdom or the mammalian kingdom, because the fungi have survived 5 mass extinctions whilst we're causing the 6th. You know, again, lots of this is my opinion, so you're very welcome to, in the questions, completely come back at me in a lot of this stuff, but it's a working theory, this stuff. So we have all these different kingdoms. As I mentioned, we're not, you know, we're sharing our kingdom in our own bodies. And then we potentially have these DMT entities. You may have heard of a tulpa. A tulpa is a Tibetan thought form. You can make your own tulpas. I've actually hosted a talk around a practitioner that, you know, allows you to make tulpas. It's a Tibetan practice. An egregore is a collection of thought forms. So you could argue a religion. If I tell you the term Christ consciousness, it creates a lot of association, right? A thought form is this idea that you give energy to something, you focus on it, and then it has its own existence. It becomes its own thing. And you know, a lot of people believe that there's already sentience in the machines. I don't agree. I think that what we have is machine learning. Very, like, you know, very clearly it's not sentient. There may be some sort of emergence, and you know, I'm fascinated by it, but at the moment it's very much our creation, but who knows what's to come. So I've really been mapping out this theory of hyperhumanism in multiple perspectives. So I've looked at the techniques of hyperhumanism, the technologies of hyperhumanism. What does hyperhumanist art look like as opposed to transhumanist art? And I've just published a chapter on that. What's the philosophy of hyperhumanism? I'm going off to the south of France after this event to stress test this term with a bunch of philosophers. And then what's the architecture of hyperhumanism? What does city design look like when you design for humans as opposed to cars? What are the politics and what is the business of hyperhumanism? And there's plenty of problems with the term hyperhumanism. I've already dismantled, already sort of said humanism created this problem. So if I put hyper in front of it, you may think, well, that's causing more problems. It's just humanism on steroids. So maybe it's about hyperhumanism. How do we be more humane to ourselves, to our communities, to the other kingdoms? So we're all coining terms here, and but I'm always fascinated by, you know, the evolution of these ideas. So I'm not just a mind; I'm a piece of meat. Right? We're all embodied. And I think the journey from the head to the heart is the longest journey that we're going to make. I could say that I spent half of my life as a head on a stick, not really living in a body, just fully in the mind. So let's have a look at the first clip.
Who knows where songs come from? You just have to sit there and relinquish all control. I think people think when you write and you create, you're the person in control and you're making all this happen as if you're, you know, some kind of magician or something, but it's not really that. You sit there and you become an antenna and you just let things happen through you. And the more you let it happen, the more you relinquish control, I think the more beautiful it is.
So how many of you relate to that? So I think this is where we have the advantage, right? A lot of every dinner party in the land is what is AI going to do for us? What's AI going? If we're giving AI the poetry, if we're giving it the role of the artist or the musician, what do we become? We need to be very careful about what we're giving up, what we are outsourcing. It's absolutely fine to work in symbiosis with these technologies, but let's not outsource our imagination. Let's not give up this channel, which is something that you sit and you have to honor the signal. I think that's the big point of hyperhumanism, that you are a channel and that you need to respect that. Because I think if you're just going to press a button in audio and create a track and think that that's fine, You know, for me, that's missing the point of creativity. That's missing the point of regenerative imagination. So the Gnostic position is that we're imprisoned in a material reality which is controlled by the demiurge. But the Hermetic perspective is that we are all living in the cosmic dream of atom. So as I mentioned, let's be clear channels and let's honor the signal. I think this whole idea that the body is a dirty thing to be overcome is absolutely missing the point. I think what we have when a lot of our intelligence will be outsourced is our bodies, is our subjective human experience. We have compassion, we have wisdom, we have things that the machines never will have. So let's maybe focus on those. Let's focus on being embodied. And one of the side effects of machine learning and AI is that maybe because of deep fakes and everything being fakeable, including video, there's a good chance a lot of us will abandon screens altogether, not being able to trust anything we see on screens. But this is not a Luddite approach. This is really about how do we use technology to become more human, not less. And I think one of the other things I'm really fascinated by is the subconscious or the unconscious. We operate very much in our conscious minds, but how do we access the unconscious, whether it's through different types of endotechnologies or different psychedelics, etc. And this is what the bad guru Alex Ebert has to say about AI and robots.
Hey everybody, I have a wonderful life hack I think you're gonna love, okay? Stop fucking life hacking, okay? You're not a goddamn algorithm, you're not a goddamn robot. We need to hold on to our humanity. Stop appropriating robot culture, okay? Robots have told me they're offended, stop it.
So I think he's got a massive point, right? We are not machines, so let's not aspire to become them. And my friend David Hansen from Hansen Robotics, he had a near-death experience, died for 5 minutes, and he came back from that experience and really wanted to prolong his life. The transhumanists want to live forever, potentially, and they don't really care about the limits that are kind of embedded in nature. So, I think that we've got to be careful. And as a result, David Hansen wants to actually give robots bodies and give them childhoods, and therefore they'll have potentially compassion if they go through trauma, right? That's how it seems to work with the human condition. So as Cadell says here, we need to think about a new form of human becoming, which is a deeper interpretation on the potentials of the future than transhumanism, where we just imagine AI is taking over from human becoming. If you look at Tescriel, if you look at this accelerationism, a lot of people like Elon Musk, they're just saying, well, we just need to get out of the way. The human project is just a stepping stone for the non-biological intelligences that are to come. But I think humans aren't necessarily evolutionarily equipped to deal with this level of complexity. And this is just the next disruptive technology, right? So I think that Gerard Lani is correct. It's not necessarily the technology that will drive us insane. It's our perception of the technology that will drive us insane. So let's stop the fear mongering. I think there's so much hyperbole with these technologies, especially with the latest AI. So how do we use technologies, these tools, to become more human? That's the basis of hyperhumanism. Hyper means we may not be human yet, as I mentioned, and therefore we need to seek the perspective of other species. Right, those other kingdoms that I mentioned. And one of the best things about AI and machine learning at the moment is that if you look at earthspecies.org, they're decoding the languages of these other species. So we now know the sperm whale has a phonetic alphabet. We now know that every elephant has a name. Every bird names its young. So when we start to use these technologies to do this Umwelt hacking to enable interbeing, I think that's a really appropriate use of the technology. So how can AI contribute to a holistic understanding of what it is to be human within all of life? Of course, when we start to ask, and when we do have these bridges to these other kingdoms, we can ask them, what do you think of the humans? We might not like what we hear, but we have to hear it. So AI is a codified representation of human prejudice. Therefore, in order to really train the AI to maximize towards the appreciation, understanding, and betterment of life, we need to feed the algorithm with the most appropriate version of humanity. And I would argue that that does not exist yet, and is certainly not found in humanism, post-humanism, or transhumanism. So a lot of us spend a lot of time building our digital selves, our digital twins. In fact, a lot of people invest more time on their virtual selves than on their real selves. And there's a double consciousness there. And I think it's really important to have a good balance if you're gonna do this. And I think all of us do it. Make sure that you have a good balance between those avatars. And let's have a look at the next clip.
Joseph Campbell has that quote that you will know what gods a culture worships by looking at its horizon. Like, what are the tallest structures on the horizon? You know, so we obviously worship leisure, comfort, banks, corporations. We have no multi-generational structures on our horizon that has been made in our lifetime. Cathedral consciousness is a culture developing a set of stories that allows them to create a cathedral. The average cathedral took 300 years to create. The pyramids took cathedral consciousness to create. It was not done in one lifetime. The thing that I think is so mystifying, the type of story required from a culture to do this type of project is so foreign to us that we have to elicit the intervention of aliens. That's how wounded we are. That's how wounded our culture is at trying to understand like what it would take for a group of people to work on something for multiple generations. I think all of our psyches need, in order to fully flourish, we need to feel like we're contributing to a multi-generational public project that's for the good of all people.
So a great definition there of hyperhumanism. And I think that how many of us think of the next 5 generations? What are our actions now doing for those generations? So it's knowing the difference between those who stay to feed the soil and those who come to grab the fruit.
Humans are not built to thrive under a transactional framework because we don't think, feel, or grow linearly. And yet, most relationships are Newtonian in nature. They're usually built on the linear premise of, what can you do for me? This line of questioning is designed to protect us from various downside risks, and it's a valid protection. But they don't capture the infinite upward potential of human connection, and that's a risk in and of itself. This is where quantum relationships come into play. Quantum relationships are those that accelerate us without always coddling our feelings. These are the relationships that illuminate, inspire, and challenge our perception of the world as we know it. And this is anything but comfortable because they point us to an alternative path by helping us rewrite our personal history. So if you're aiming for linear and safe results in your life, sure, terminate any connection that slightly inconveniences you. But if you want your mental emotional real estate to open to new possibilities, then instead of asking, what can you do for me? Start asking, what do you see that I don't?
So this is really the basis of dialogos, right? That we work in our silos and we get so far. But then when you're in dialogue with people, and I've had some amazing conversations here with David Glowacki over there, with Lucas, with Melissa, with Jose, and they're all like giving me good feedback, which enables me to really move forward with my thinking. And I cannot do that on my own. But there's this also this term transjective, which is when you combine the subjective and the objective. We need to understand that objects and persons are part of a living, breathing ecology of relationships and that everything affects everything else. A transjective state allows us then to enter the transcendent world of relationship. So check out John Vervaeke if you haven't seen his work. So I really believe life is a mystery to be lived rather than a problem to be solved. It's not something we need to constantly engineer, and we don't need to be in a constant state of doing. I think there's the cult of productivity, right? The cult of production, where you have to be seen to be making culture, right? And I think that it's important that we are human beings. To be able to feel pleasure, I must pause the faculties of doing, achieving, performing, and become an instrument of sensation. Also, it's really important to sit in death and have death literacy and learn the importance of dying, right? If you look at the Tibetan Book of the Dead, or if you look at all these lineages where they learn to die before they die, every time we go to sleep, it's a form of a mini death. So I think get close to death. Don't really get morbid about it, but realize it's a huge part of life. And I believe that death is not an ending, but actually another beginning and a massive expansion of consciousness. I fully have had many experiences, which I can talk to you about afterwards. But also hyperhumanism is about your degree of aliveness. The degree in which you feel whole is the degree to which you are aware of your connection to every living being. So just becoming sensitive to everything around you. So we're trying to build this hyperhumanist framework, getting lots of different people involved in this question. But hyperhumanism, in its basic sense, examines how we can use technology to transform the human condition. Transhumanism, however, I mean, a good example of that is Elon Musk's Neuralink, right? How many of you really want to install your mobile phone directly in your brain? Anyone? Anyone fancy Neuralink? Ben, are you here? Because Ben will probably be up for it. But I mean, for me, I'm always trying to create a barrier to entry to my phone, which is why I have this, right? So my screen smashed, and now I plug a mouse into my phone, which is a barrier to entry. Instead of touching it 150 times, I touch it 5 times a day. You know, and a lot of people are downgrading their technology to dumb phones, so they don't have constant attention deficit, right? We're living in this attention deficit. So transhumanism requires us to become dependent on technology, which subverts our ability to develop the skills for ourselves. I know people that don't even use the internet. They go out and try and solve the problem themselves before they go to the bigger brain. So it's that kind of focus. You know, what happens if we have a solar flare that wipes out all of electricity? You know, who's going to survive? It's the indigenous. It's the people that don't have necessarily the technologies. It's the people that know how to forage, know how to hunt. These are the hyperhuman skills. So in contrast, hyperhumanism uses technology as a catalyst for developing our own innate human abilities. It's about using technology as a scaffold. So you may use technology for a few weeks to learn a new skill or a new sense, but then you take the technology away and you develop that skill for yourselves. So a bit like the stabilizers on your bike. When you first learn how to cycle a bike, you'd have stabilizers for a few months, right? But then you take them away. You don't keep them on. So me and various people, this is Eddie Castaneda's slide, really mapping out these different techniques and technologies, and there's thousands of them. So things like peripheral vision. How many of you know about peripheral vision? So we're going to do a little exercise now. So just defocus. Peripheral vision is practiced by athletes. I do it before a big talk or when I'm going into some sort of panic attack. So it just allows you to calm down your physiology. It takes 30 seconds. So just defocus your eyes. Stop staring at the screen. Take in your whole field of view, which is 180 degrees, and just take it in as one image. And you'll start to calm down. Your whole body, your whole physiology just starts to calm down. So this is practicing your peripheral vision. So let's talk about perception. We only experience 1% of the visual spectrum and 1% of the auditory spectrum. So we're kind of locked in to a very narrow bandwidth. And I did a whole TEDx talk at Oxford University about this. So, you know, when you look in the mirror, you don't see yourself as you are. You see yourself flipped back to front. You can see yourself as you actually look by putting 2 mirrors at 90-degree angles, and then it's called a true mirror. And then you can see yourself for the first time. And you don't recognize yourself. You're like, who's that? Because it's like you're getting this cognitive dissonance. So other people see you as you look, but you don't. Same with your hearing. You may have heard yourself on a recording, and you think, who's that? It's you. But you don't hear your own voice because you're too near to it. So you're already living in a virtual reality. And then we're actually locked into our image media. All of our images are based on linear perspective, which was codified in the Renaissance. We don't see in linear perspective, unfortunately. We see in curvilinear perspective. So all of our image media is fundamentally flawed as well in the way our cameras are constructed. So then across our social media, our phones, we're kind of locked into these tiny little bits of real estate. The love of your life's walking past. You don't notice because you're just zombified by your device. And on top of that, during the pandemic, there's something called optic flow, which is basically as you're walking through space, in your peripheral, you're seeing things, you're moving through reality, right? You're moving through things are passing you by. That's called optic flow, which means that you're much more likely to be creative. You're much more likely to learn because of being in optic flow. So you become a goldfish if you're stuck in a room and you're not moving through space. So you could say this represents a full spectrum lockdown. So how can hyperhumanism break us out of this? And on top of that, we've got the attention wars. All of the algorithms are harvesting your attention, and your attention is fully linked to your consciousness. So how do we get that back? As Nietzsche says, what does man actually know about himself? Is he indeed ever able to perceive himself completely as if laid out in a display case? Does nature not conceal most things from him, even concerning his own body? In order to confine and lock him within a proud, deceptive consciousness, aloof from the coils of the bowels, the rapid flow of the bloodstream, and the intricate quivering of the fibers, nature threw away the key. So I'm really interested in the effects of technology. I've been a cognitive scientist for 30 years, really looking at how we use technology to learn. But even things like, using your phone to take a selfie, that's going to distort how you see because of the lens. Your nose looks bigger, loads of people getting nose jobs. It's like, in Japan, I worked at Keio University for a year and Tokyo University for a year. We did a project. Perception is huge, right? So if you lift an object and it's white, you're more likely to able to lift more of that weight than it's black. So we actually used augmented reality to make everything white in the gym because all the dumbbells are black. You can pull more weight. We've got hardcore science papers on it. So have a look at that one. So let's move on to endotechnologies, which is again body technologies or your natural abilities.
The most sophisticated pharmacy in the universe is in your brain. It's called the hypothalamus, and it produces chemicals on demand, consistent with the way you think, feel and perceive. So if you feel brave, you'll produce a chemical called interleukin-2, which is the most efficient chemical for fighting cancer worldwide. In fact, I checked today, a course of artificial interleukin-2 can cost between $6,000 to $8,000 per course. Your body produces it in the right quantities to go to the right place at the right time. When you feel calm, you produce your own Valium. You don't need Valium from a drug manufacturing company, which has side effects. When you're happy, you produce endorphins and enkephalins. The bottom line here is your body has the ability to heal itself provided you are thinking the right way. Thinking the wrong way just produces the alternative result. Always focus on the positive, be brave, be happy, be healthy. Feel free to follow and like and share. Take care.
So we know consciousness is programmable. As Jamie Wheal talks about in his hedonic engineering, this stacking, this what I call holotechnica, this stacking of different protocols, we can change consciousness, right? We can create 5-MeO-DMT experiences without 5-MeO-DMT through our sexual energy, through our breath work, through dance, etc. But we know we can create additional neuroplasticity, but for what purpose? What are you going to do with this consciousness augmentation? We are all chasing our own tails, trying to create altered states. What's the next altered state? What's the next peak experience? But how do we create altered traits? How do we create lasting change that actually goes somewhere? And it's very much this idea as well that we've got maybe 20 to 30 senses, not 5. How many people are aware of that and how many people are using those senses? That's hyperhumanism. So we have 1,000 different types of meditation. We've got fasting. We've got darkness retreats. We've got dance. Even if you just focus on all the different types of breath work, these technologies can be stacked, right? So if you've done a darkness retreat and then you fast like Luke does here, and then you take a psychedelic, it's going to be a massively different psychedelic effect with that as a base layer on the protocol. So if you haven't checked out John Vervaeke's work, check out his work on psychotechnologies. There's just so much that we can do without any of these external stimuli. This professor spent 74 days underwater, and his physiology, his body looked like it had de-aged by 10 years. So what is that kind of technology? When we can actually have these hyperbaric chambers and live at certain depths, even in your living room. So I think it's really important to understand the time as well, the time that we have. We have 1,000 months as humans, generally, that's 83 years. 1,000 months is not very long, right? 1,000 months. People think they own things. People think they own the land. It's hilarious. You're just a custodian, right? You don't even own your own body. So just enjoy every moment as it is sacred. It's all for you, but none of it's yours. So be responsible for the energy you bring to the space and take control of your mind, which is an act of rebellion in this current situation where everyone is being zombified. And I think it's really important, as Jose told me before the talk, if you go to the Center for Humane Technology and you look at their course, Or if you look at ethical OS, make sure that your technology is designed not just for in a human-centric way, but in a humane-centric way. So you as designers, if you're making technologies, make sure you're designing them in a very humane way. And we have to unlearn so many things. I love this Instagram channel. I don't know how many of you use Instagram, but it strikes me that every second Instagram account is a healer of some sort, trying to sell you some sort of snake oil. And I think we need to heal from healing. I think there's a really serious problem that we're focused too much on being happy. And, it's diminishing returns. If you're only obsessed with happiness, we learn way more from our mistakes, things that go wrong, pain. It's not all about happiness. And I don't think we understand our limits as humans either. Look at this chap sitting at minus 40 degrees, just like he's out for a picnic. So what are these limits? We're told that we'll die without water within 3 days, whereas I know a lot of Russian friends fast water. Don't just stop eating. They stop drinking water for 11 days just as an annual thing. So what are these limits? And is language limiting us? So I think hyperhumanism, a big aspect of it is this post-traumatic growth. How do we grow? I want you to take your darkest experiences, the shit that almost broke you, and turn it into glittering fucking life force energy. I want you to take your deepest pains and torments and turn them into beautiful, radiant healing for yourself and the world around you. And I think a revolution that is based on people exercising their creativity in the midst of devastation is one of the best things that humans are capable of doing. But on top of that, I think a true measure of success and wealth is the ability to have a very calm nervous system and to self-regulate, to put yourself in a parasympathetic nervous system. Having all of these abilities. Another technique.
There's a psychological phenomenon called the Tetris effect, which says that the thing that you look at last thing at night imprints on your subconscious more strongly than anything else during the day. So when we go from being asleep to waking up, or being awake to falling asleep, they're called the hypnopompic and hypnagogic stages. And they are stages where our subconscious is very susceptible to suggestion. And so I keep my physical action board next to my bed so that I see it first thing in the morning and last thing at night.
So how many of you have taken advantage of these liminal states that are the hypnopompic and the hypnagogic? So if you're exhausted and you've got a big problem to solve and you're just trying to go through it, stop and go to sleep. But go to sleep with that intention that you're going to wake up with the solution. I know a lot of musicians that will wake up and they'll write a song that's been delivered to them in their sleep. Edison, for instance, used to have a bunch of ball bearings in a hand and have a saucepan at the bottom, and he would hold the ball bearings, and when he'd fall asleep, he'd lose grip of the ball bearings would hit the saucepan and wake him up. And then he would have these insights. So it's all about these kind of liminal spaces where you can be more creative. And as I mentioned, altered traits. So we know that a lot of long-term meditators have changed their brain structure. Their frontal lobes have become massive because they've trained. It's, again, as Jose says, it's like altered states are kind of free, but altered traits are earned. You earn your long-lasting change. Another great term from the Japanese, yatori, the conscious act of slowing down to allow us to savor the world. How many of us really taste the food that you're eating and just chuck it down your throat and don't even think about it, There's a reason why a lot of religious orders, they wouldn't speak when they're eating because they're just trying to savor every mouthful. The refusal to rush, no talking, just absorbing the world around us with no goal except to see that human being, a state of inner spaciousness emerges. And another fantastic term called inscendence, the impulse not to rise above the world, which is transcendence, but to climb into it and seek its core. So let's move on to some psychedelic work. So I've been very lucky to be involved at Imperial College London for 8 years, having my brain scanned whilst being injected with DMT. It's always good to see if you have a brain every year and if it's still there. But I also get a full body checkup and echocardiograms, etc. So it started in 2016, where I was just an EEG cap at the beginning with an injection of DMT, and I was told off because I was breathing too heavily. And I was like, guys, you can't, that's how you navigate the space with your breath. Like, you need better equipment. I'm not going to not breathe. So so they did get better equipment. And then I had an fMRI with an injection of DMT, which I can tell you was no picnic. How many of you been in a fMRI machine? So it's very claustrophobic, right? It's like super. I'm not even. I don't suffer from claustrophobia, but I did then. And then suddenly, because you're not even administering the drug to yourself, so you kind of forget that you're being administered DMT. And then suddenly, the onslaught, the amount of entities that turned up en masse was just extraordinary, and the variety of the entities, all extremely concerned for me, because I was in this machine, right? And they were like, "What the is happening to you? Why are you being scanned? We're the ones that scan you. Like, what are you doing?" And so I had to explain to them, I'm in a research study, and I spent the entire 40 minutes trying to calm down the entities, which is a bit of a role reversal. The more recent study is the DMTX study. So DMT extended, and this actually was started by the Germans in the early 2000s. So what they've done is they've basically taken, when you're being anesthetized for an operation, you are fed an anesthetic through a drip. So instead of the anesthetic, they're feeding you DMT continuously. And what's interesting about DMT, there's not much of a tolerance. So you can be kept at the peak of the DMT experience, potentially indefinitely. And again, this is a light bulb moment, because it's like, therefore it becomes like a form of electricity, right? You can either, be in the DMT experience or out of the DMT experience. And I'm really fascinated by, let's look at this as a hyperhuman project rather than a transhuman project. So people like Andrew Gallimore, for instance, Andrew Gallimore wants to live inside the DMT peak of experience. And I'm like, Andrew, we're here for 1,000 months. Why do you want to just like spend the whole time in DMT? That's not what you're here to do, right? So maybe that is death. Maybe, who knows what it is, but it's certainly not something you want to do forever. But I think having these curated trips where you can go in for a day and have a specific problem to solve is fascinatingly, something that should be explored. So there's lots of problems with this project, lots of potential complexity, but it's happening. We've got a license to actually administer DMTX in the Caribbean. If you want to find out more about what happened to 4 of us at Imperial, this video, which is hosted by Rick Strassman, Graham Hancock, and Andrew Gallimore, check that out. It's a 3-hour video, but massive insights came out of it, where a lot of us seem to experience things like precognition, telepathy, and all sorts of other altered traits. So again, who knows whether these are biased experiences or whether there's some truth to it. But this is the kind of thing that we want to explore when we have the lab out in the Caribbean. So one of the things I also see on DMT is this language, this like hieroglyphic language. I spoke to Alison Gray about this, and she created this light language. She actually experienced this on LSD. But I'm really fascinated by this, and I actually asked the community, and lots of people were sending me these different examples of this language. And this is what I really want to draw out. I want to sit there and maybe spend a day or 2 days in the DMT experience and draw out this hieroglyphic language, which looks like VR. It's like 3D, and I can move around this language. It's always at the core of my vision. And it seems like it's something that you can, that there's something there, right? That something's persistent. And that's the technology, as I mentioned, this kind of technology. And what was really cool about being part of this study is that we get to draw, not during, which is what I'm annoyed about, but afterwards we get to draw out what we've seen. And I'm always seeing these entities, and I'm always seeing this sort of language. And it's very moral, you're sort of shown. It's like there's some sort of exchange going on, right? Where you have to give up yourself in order to actually commune with these entities. And of course, these entities may not have independent existence. They may just be your archetypes, your higher self, your subconscious, as I mentioned, or they may well be the sentient other. And Anton Bilton, who's funded a lot of this research, he jokes that he's not giving all of his inheritance to his kids. He's putting his money into finding and discovering the sentient other. So these are some of the experiences, which I don't have a huge amount of time to go into, but one thing I will tell you about was the highest dose of my DMT extended state experience. Just picture the scene. And this is the other problem with doing these clinical trials, that you're doing them in hospital settings. And of course, we associate hospitals with death and illness, not the best place to trip. So, but anyway, I'm sitting in the hospital ward. I'm very honored to be part of this work, because it's very much just looking at what is consciousness rather than trying to focus on depression or ADHD, etc. So I'm on the highest dose of this DMTX study, and I can see at the bottom of my bed a white disc appear. So imagine a black hole, but this is a white hole, and I'm hallucinating this white hole, and I'm like, oh my God, there it is. There's the unity space. That's the unity space of 5-MeO DMT. So I'm kind of like experiencing a 5-MeO experience inside my DMT experience. And as I'm actually inside this experience, I'm sort of shuffling down the bed, trying to get in the hole, which is absurd because I'm like cannulated in both arms. But as this is happening, suddenly the disc cracks open, and there's a crack appear, and I'm like, oh my God, there's like an alien takeover of the DMT space. And I'm like, what's going to happen? Like, so as it breaks open, I'm like, is it going to just go back to a duality? But actually, what it revealed was that there was a plurality of unities, a multiplicity of unities behind this, and that's kind of what I've always been asking. How many of you have done 5-MeO DMT? Few of you, right? It's very rare. 5-MeO DMT is, for me, one of the most profound, non-dual experiences where you become light itself, you become eternal and infinite. And it's, I'm always asking, what's producing the light? Is this the end of the journey? Is this death? Is this the void? So I'm always asking, what is beyond the light, the white light? And this NN-DMT extended state experience seemed to give me a clue into that phenomenology, that there's not just one type of existence, but there's a multiplicity of different types of life that maybe aren't even life, but something completely different. So some of the techniques that I adopted in this 3-month study, so Chris Timmerman, who I was working with, we tagged it DMT Church, and I had a dieter. I refrained from having sex for a month just to see what that would do to the DMT experience, and it massively amplified the effects to have that chi retained. And as I mentioned, you have to sort of give yourself over to these higher, whatever they are. And I'm very firmly on the fence as to whether they're just me as my higher self or whether they are some sort of independence. But they seem very benevolent. When I was in the scanner and I had the experience of thousands of them rushing towards me, giving up the cosmic joke, they were like, bang, like they showed me that I'm immortal. They're like, bang, you're immortal. They added ticker tape so I wouldn't forget. And then they were like, but you're not scheduled. You're not meant to be dying now. Why are you in that scanner? Like, it's so noisy. They're probably just freaked out. And also they don't want you to go back too frequently. Oh no, not you again. Like, we saw you like not that long. Not that there's any time there, but they sort of like, they're keeping tabs on you. They'll still perform the psychic surgery on you, but they don't appreciate you coming back too frequently. So be more mindful of NN-DMT experiences, I would argue, because I think that there is a relationship at death. I think they do come for you. I think they may be your guides. Of course, again, this is all just my own personal experience. So I think there is a mystery school. As I mentioned, before I saw that unity experience cracking open, I was given a physical key, which I had to grab from one of their tentacles, like literally capturing it in space. And Chris Timmerman also does these incredible micro-phenomenological interviews where you're not like trying to remember your experience, you're re-experiencing it. It's a very clever technique. So as I mentioned, I'm working with Andrew Gallimore, and Andrew's got a very transhumanist agenda for DMT Extended. He wants to put us in vats, and he wants to, a bit like suspended animation on the way to Mars. He thinks that we can have like food just coming in through a tube, waste management taken care of. And as he's presenting this research to a bunch of shaman in the room at Tyringham Initiative, they're all just like, this guy's insane. And of course, I think he's just spent too much time in Japan. He's become a misanthrope, and he wants to become a DMT elf. That's fair enough. That's his ambition. But I'm now on board to try and rein him in, and just to say, Andrew, there's another way of doing this where we don't need to live there. I think most drugs are not they're not houses, they're doorways, right? You open the door to this new thing, and then you can go back. There's techniques to go back there, but you don't want to live there. We're here for a very short time. Let's have a human experience. Let's not like have DMT haircuts, DMT swimming lessons, and just like have a whole like DMT universe, because we're already like producing it potentially endogenously. So also he's looking, and this is another bit of research from Andrew, is magnetoreceptors. So this is an interesting research where we may not actually need drugs, but we'll actually use magnets to turn on and off the receptors. So this is the project I mentioned, DMT Island. So I'm now a director at Noonautics. And, you know, it's very much focused on this problem of, you know, SETI have spent millions, hundreds of millions, looking for extraterrestrial life. You know, I think the idea that there isn't any life out there is absurd. I think it's just very far away a lot of the time, although my instinct is that they don't really want to visit us because we're just like stupid monkeys destroying our own ecosystem. So we're just bad food. We're like bad takeaway food. They don't want to even eat us, which probably protects us. That's my working hypothesis, that they don't even want to come here. But yeah, maybe we can actually spend some money, and SETI are funding us. So maybe they can actually, we can look inward. They've just received a 300 million donation from one donor. So maybe let's look inwards as well as outwards to hedge our bets. So this is some of the stats. 50% of people experience these non-animal entities and have all these sorts of encounters. And some of the aims of this program, so we want to map the structure of the space. We want to try and establish two-way communication and develop techniques for the real-time transmission of information into and from the DMT space, and develop an understanding of the origin and nature of these intelligences. And I think we're doing this mindfully as much as possible with the indigenous community as part of this. So one of the things Chris Timmerman and Anton have done recently is go to Colombia, sit and do ayahuasca with a shaman, and they've brought that same shaman back to London to do DMTX to make certain that we have some sort of approval from the lineages. And I think that a lot of indigenous, even myself, would argue that this is just another, typical Westerners. They just want to extract. It's like the coca leaf to the cocaine to the crack. It's just a Western model to try and take the essence, like ibogaine from iboga, etc. But what's really unique about DMT is that it does seem to stabilize, and it's quite safe. We've found out from this study that the heart rate stabilizes. It does have a bit of a roller coaster phase at the beginning, but you tend to stabilize. So the space itself, in my experience, doesn't really stabilize, but there's lots to be done. And what we can do in this study, in this retreat center, is really be unshackled by academic red tape. So at Imperial, they get about 20 people through this study over 2 years, and then they take 2 years to publish. We can have a lot more people. We can be a lot more open with the protocol, really fine-tune the context engineering, understanding what's the best way of putting somebody into one of these experiments. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in the future. So this project consists of a research center, a lab where we're going to be able to make novel compounds, and also the retreat center where you're going to be able to have your DMTX journeys and then go out and swim in the coral reef. So it's not a hospital. Maybe we'll start to get real proper results that aren't skewed by the context. I think 80% of the medicine is the context. 20% of it is just the medicine. So the medicine is a very small part of what you're going to actually experience. And it involves a lot of a multidisciplinary team with lots of different neuroscientists, psychologists, therapists, linguists, cartographers, etc. And what I'm really fascinated about this is this idea of we can curate the journey whilst you're in the trip, because you're having a continuous infusion. So potentially, as you come across a bunch of entities, you can say, because you can talk, right? You're still kind of present. It's not like 5-MeO DMT where you're very much not present a lot of the time. you can actually talk to the person that's administering, and you can say, I'm actually witnessing some entities now. Can you turn up the resolution? I want to actually speak to these entities, have a meeting, and then you have your meeting, and then you can turn down the dose. So it's this idea of a curatable trip and going in at different doses to solve different problems. So we're very much looking at mathematicians, scientists, coming with a specific problem that they want to go into this liminal space and have this experience and try and solve a problem. So Lomi massage is one of the things I'm recommending, to have a 5-person, 10-handed massage before your DMT experience to really put you in that incredible, parasympathetic nervous system. Or hyperbaric chamber to get your oxygen levels sorted. But I'm just fascinated by DMT, primarily because NN-DMT, Changa Ayahuasca, seems to, when we're sitting here, light shines upon us, right? We're having the experience of light shining upon us. When you're on DMT, light seems to emit from bodies. You seem to have these light bodies. David Glackley made this incredible experience called isness, and light emits from objects. But 5-MeO-DMT, you seem to become light, right? You become light and you become eternal. So very different relationships with light with these different medicines. But what's fascinating is the Koji tribe, they have this practice of taking their shaman and putting them in the darkness. So from birth, they're put into the caves and they're kept there for 9 or 18 years. For that length of time before they're brought out, they're taught about the world, and then they're brought out and they're shown the world on their 9th or 18th birthday. And their endogenous DMT apparently is really incubated in the dark, but yet it's all about the light when you take the DMT. So it's super fascinating. So let's move on to the next section of this. So how many of you do journaling? So about a third of you. I highly recommend journaling. I've done it every day for about 30 years. And I've written down my entire life. I only write for 5 minutes a day. I'm quite strict, and it's quite a sort of structured thing. But as Kierkegaard says, life must be lived forwards, but can only really be understood backwards. So that's really a motivation for me to try and understand my life, because I've got it. I've got the journey, right? And I'm trying to do more with my journaling than I can do with my everyday memory. And I'm trying to construct who I am through this practice. So most of us don't take an active role in this construction. And it is an art project, right? You're kind of a living work of art. And it takes work. It's like I've come from a Zora festival straight into Dem Festival without any kind of reflection time. It's quite a process you don't have that time to reflect. And I think you can find wisdom in your own life by mining your own experience and taking this higher order perspective, gaining this overview effect. And that's what a journaling practice enables. It enables you to jump out of point of view and go into field of view. If you've got enough data, you start to actually build a field of view. And I think that, I'm working on the basis that you need both Tantra and Sutra. It's not enough to just be a hedonist. You need to be a disciplined hedonist, right? You need to have some practice that grounds you, everything in moderation, including moderation. So as Zizek says, we don't really want to get what we think we want. A lot of us live in this virtual reality, as I mentioned before, but we're also living in expectation, constantly thinking, what am I going to get? And then we get it, and it's not what we wanted.
Knowing yourself is the most difficult thing that we ever do in this lifetime.
No, why is that? Because we live with ourselves. I'm me, so why do I struggle with getting to know me? And do I know who I am?
Well, it's like a knife. A knife can't cut itself. An eye can't see itself unless it has the aid of a mirror. A tooth can't bite itself. A light can't illumine itself. And our own consciousness can't perceive itself. So we are the only ones that can't see the full 360 degrees of us. And we're literally lying to ourselves in a way when we look in the mirror, because we only see the things we want to see. It's very rare for a human being to be able to see themselves objectively without their conditioning biases. And the way we formed our personas through time is by deciding the things that caused us shame, the things that made us feel vulnerable. All of us at some stage say, oh, I don't want to feel that vulnerability. So we hide it away. Right? We puff ourselves up to the world around us. Or we go and say, I'm not that. And we start judging it at everyone else as a mechanism of deflection. Because what we experience in this life is everything that we judged is what we attracted. And we will continue to attract everything we judge in the world around us until we no longer judge everything we attract. And this is the life that we experience. It's not a universe, it's a you-inverse, I believe.
So I'm really fascinated by time, and I think journaling is another way of really understanding time and how strange it is.
Aristotle, when he treats time in the physics, starts with a riddle that he never answers that goes something like this. Think about time as divided into the past, the present, and the future. And then think for a while about what the present is. How thick is the present? The present is just a limit between the past and the future. And then you get the paradox. Because the past is something that does not exist. It has existed, but it does not exist any longer. The future is something that does not exist. It will exist, but it doesn't exist. And the present is nothing. So time seemed to be a nothing dividing something non-existent from something non-existent.
So I don't know how many of you experience time in a very strange way, but one of my friends is building a watch. It's called the Unwatch. It's a watch that you wear but you never look at, and it vibrates so that you actually feel time on your wrists. So you've got different vibration for the minutes, different vibration for the seconds, different vibration for the hours, and you start to burn time into your wrist. So time moves away from being an abstract concept to a sense. So you're turning time into a sense. And his main feedback on this, but after wearing it for some time, is that he now makes the perfect pancakes because he knows time, right? He doesn't burn pancakes anymore. He used to burn pancakes all the time. And a bit like when you're watching a YouTube video or an audio book, you actually speed it up, right? You may put it on 1.5 speed because you've got to get through the data, but then you kind of get used to that sped up time. And it's the same with this. So he claims that he will be able to give you 30% extra time in an exam because he can manipulate time, slow it down, speed it up, etc. But I think that the problem here is that if you turn time into a sense, what happens to flow? What happens to flow states? What happens to your psychedelic trips if you know time and you can't like bend time anymore? It sounds like a disaster. So he offered me one of these watches and I politely declined because I just think there's certain technologies which will create some sort of negative long-term effect. So go back to the journal. So I think I write it from 3 levels. So I write the content digitally. What I do is just written as content. And then what I feel, context, is all captured in the pictures I take and the videos and audios that I capture. And then crucially, with concepts, I always write my concepts by hand, right? Notebook. Highly recommend any ideation, any creativity, make sure you write it by hand because you're imprinting. You're much more likely to remember it if you imprint it. And as I mentioned, this superpower, this moving from point of view to field of view, so I can read a relationship because I've got such a big data set. I can take a cross-section through that 30 years and look at this day last year and the year before and the year before and the year before and the year before and the year before, and I get 30 different me's communicating again because that one segment unravels the days around it. So I have this sort of felt experience of a nested ecology. I know that I was more skilled or more intuitive at a certain age. Like when I was 17, I was really poetic without having ever lived. Why are you so poetic very early on in life? So it's like you have this realization that life's not linear, but it's in a spiral, and that you have these new abilities at different times in your life. So it's important to have that ability to jump back into it. And I can get this bird's eye view. So say I've been in a relationship for a year, I can read that in 60 pages, read that in an afternoon, get the whole thing, start to see pattern recognition. It's like a therapist, you can see all these things unfold that you can't see in real time. So I'm really applying these spatial metaphors to this large data set. And you can see this happening in social media as well. Like if you're a Facebook user, it's called Memories. It used to be called On This Day, where you get this cross-section through all the years you've been on social media. So I'm turning my life into architecture by taking this cross-section through the content, context, and concepts, realizing the path isn't a straight line, but it's a spiral. Continually, I'm coming back to things I thought I understood, and I'm seeing deeper truths. So another little clip.
If you knew that you would be successful and that people would forget, what would you do?
What are things that you love to do as a kid that nobody had to teach you how to do? What are things that you do that when you do them, you get flow? What is a problem in the world that you feel really called to try to help or improve? Who are the people that you admire and why do you admire them? All of these are questions that if you started to map them together, you would see that they all tie in the middle, and whatever it is in the middle, it's your dharma. And I think the best way to think about it is your dharma is like a horizon, and it will continue to reveal itself to you as you move towards it. But the way you move towards it is you commit to a craft. And that craft is not something that you have to make up. It's not something you have to go find. It's something that you have to admit to yourself that you want to do.
So I really love Eric Godsey's work. He does this thing called the DAC, which is the Dharma Artistic Collective, where a lot of artists come together and they work together on their own work. So it's to try and get over this procrastination and really focused on your dharma. Like, what's your passion? I don't ask people, what do you do? I was like, what's your real passion? Like, what would you do if you only had one thing that you could do? What is it? And let's focus on that. So some of the real affordances and benefits of journaling, from my perspective, it creates this feedback loop. So it forces me to live. I have to have new material every day. If I don't have new material by midnight, I have to go out and talk to some stranger. And it has to really fit in the body of the work. It's not something I want to keep repeating. So I have to have new material for the body of work. And it enables me to be a detective in my own life. As I mentioned, we live for such a short amount of time, so it really makes me aware of that time. And it's really interesting to understand that when one door closes, another one opens, right? You start to see the metaphor that's there. And you're more aware of your shadow side. You're in this double consciousness where you can sit inside your 360 view and stop lying to yourself. It's very good to have this moral compass, and it kind of reveals your actual will, and it gives you these understandings that you only really keep what you share. So ultimately, it gives me this macroscopic vision where I'm able to sit within my own power of looking through and occupying my own field of vision, within one field of view, to be both in the world and to see yourself in it. So just to finish this section, structured journaling leads to these perceptual flexibilities, conscious state shifting, cognitive diversity, and regenerative imagination. So if you're not journaling, maybe practice through that context, content, and concepts. So let's move on quickly to AI and cyberdelics and technology. So I think we're obviously really feeling that we're moving from this kind of information communication to experience communication, really wanting to immerse ourselves in these technologies. I've spent many years looking at this idea of context engineering or ontological design, which is when you actually change the way you sense as the base layer. So I walked around London wearing this device, which is called the FlyViz 360, which takes a 360 camera viewpoint and squashes it into 180 degrees. So remember earlier when we did our peripheral vision exercise. So this means your basic field of view becomes 360. So you literally can see in 360, and people used to throw things at me from behind and I would catch them. So what happens when you have 360 vision as your base layer? And it only takes about 15 minutes to adjust to seeing in 360. So what happens to fashion? What happens to sport? Not that you'd want to wear this on a sporting activity. And then in the middle there, it's called Nirvana. This, again, is a bit of an old technology, but it's this idea of stimulating the vagus nerve as you're listening to music. So it's a pair of headphones which is stimulating the vagus nerve, which changes music as a whole. Because music, if your mood center is being stimulated, then all of music has the potential to be modified or amplified through such an intervention. And then we have digital taste down the bottom here, Wristify, which changes your body temperature, being able to transform your hearing, Hear One active listening. This device actually enables you to remove certain sounds like people snoring, or like increase the bass. So you go to the gig and you actually don't feel the bass is loud enough, so you can turn up the bass just for yourself. So McLuhan talks about these hot and cold media, right? Cold media is like when you're watching, when you're listening to the radio or you're reading a book, you're filling in so much more of the information with your own imagination, whereas a hot media would be something like a CGI film where it's all done for you, not much room for your imagination. It's like popcorn, it's just consuming. So generative AI obviously is really kicking off, and it's created this, this fear. I think a lot of times, a lot of people feel like they're redundant already because these AI tools do what you used to do in a touch of a button. But I think when the creative act is externalized to our machines, what happens to our human creativity? This is why hyperhumanism is so important. How can we make sure it's augmented rather than outsourced? And going back to the transhumanist agenda, so the transhumanists think every problem has a solution. It's an engineering approach to life, whereas the hyperhumanist approach, the human condition is not a problem to solve, but an experience to be had. So what cannot be outsourced? And I mentioned this already. It's this idea of, obviously the AI tools change the relative value of our human skills and therefore what we should know and what we should be able to do. It's also, a lot of my students are questioning what they should focus on in terms of career. So fear is the mind killer here, I think. We've got to I think it's important to know what these tools are capable of, but also let's develop these hyperhuman literacies and map out these technologies and techniques. And I think that automation at present is not so much getting rid of drudgery and bullshit jobs, but creative and rewarding work. It's driving down the economic value of artists and content creators of all types, which could cause a serious economic collapse if we're not careful. Harari refers to this as the gods and the useless. So the method here is focus on the relationships and use concepts from hyperhumanism to reframe our relationships to these tools in the hope of inspiring new ways of being more human and more creative in the age of generative AI. And I don't know how many of you have heard of model collapse. So model collapse is super interesting because it means that if your model is actually training on the whole internet, which a lot of these AI models are now, and 30% of the internet supposedly now is generative AI constructed, and the AI starts to eat its own tail, so it starts to actually model its data on that data, it starts to collapse. It's called model collapse. Let's have a little look at it.
Just like how a healthy ecosystem needs biodiversity, AI needs diversity in its training data to be effective. Otherwise, you get model collapse. Model collapse is what happens when AI models are trained on synthetic, AI-generated content, as opposed to human-generated content, and degrade. Simply put, it's a feedback loop. As generative AI models create more and more content that gets shared on the internet, the next generation of AI models eventually train on that content instead of human-generated content. These new models will rely too heavily on patterns, overestimating probable events, and underestimating improbable events, which means these synthetically trained models will compound errors, misinterpret data, and give increasingly wrong and homogeneous outputs. This phenomenon has the potential to create data pollution on a large scale. Although generative AI enables more efficient text generation than ever seen before, model collapse implies that none of this data will be valuable to train the next generation of AI models.
So obviously we've also got this whole question around the environmental impact of AI. So if you're going to use generative AI to make an image or make a video or whatever it is, think about your environmental impact by using those technologies, because it's vast. One of the other bits of research that I'm fascinated by is the Japanese that are probably leading on this, which is recording the visual cortex as you're dreaming or even when you're awake, to actually start to record your dreams. I'm really interested in this idea of recording trips, but tripping doesn't necessarily happen in the visual cortex. You may have seen this work from MIT where they put people in an MRI scanner and gave them an image and used machine learning and computer vision modeling to actually reconstruct what they're seeing. So there's the image that's trained at the top and then the reconstruction at the bottom. So the computer is actually able to see what you're seeing. And we've had this whole debate. After this, at 7 o'clock, we're going to have Cyberdelics for you to try out just there in the Cyberdelics tent. This is work from Jose, who's my partner, one of my partners on the Cyberdelics Nexus and Cyberdelics Society. And it's called Virtual Rituality. So how do we bring ritual back to these technologies and combine things like sensory theater with context engineering, which is this idea of ontological design, with ritual. And you may have tried flicker machines. So brain entrainment can be done with all sorts of different technologies, putting your brain into a certain state, so it feels like it's had a little sleep. Brain entrainment's huge, and there's so many different retreat centers, neuro wearables, neuro spas, meditation apps. Lumina is a really good one. If you don't have the money for a bigger flicker light, you can try it just with your phone on that Lumina app, which basically uses the flashlight in your phone to give you this flicker experience. And it's quite profound. These technologies can work again in this stack. And we've worked with Sound Self. There's people here that have worked on Sound Self. WavePaths is another platform that's generative music for psychedelic journeying. So let's move into sound as the next section. So we know if you're given or music is played, especially music that you know during a surgery, then you're much less likely to need a lot of anesthetic. Alzheimer's patients being played music enables them to unlock their locked-in syndrome. Music given to premature babies helps them grow.
This is 20.
We also know that sound given to plants enables them to grow quicker. And, we've got all sorts of people doing plant signaling, and this is fungi music. Music made by mushrooms. It's really not very good, is it? But I mean, if you're a mushroom, it might be amazing. But I think we need to be less human-centric in our creations. Like maybe we should be making music for other species, and maybe we should be listening to music from other species in this interbeing. But I think there is a massive link between music and medicine. I'm really focused in on music, and I've got a big project I'll tell you about. This is Zach Bush, who is a big hero.
Bees are very cool this way. So a hive of bees will thrum its wings in the key of C. And when you put somebody with PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, in the presence of a beehive, that C retunes their cognitive dissidence of post-traumatic stress, and over the course of a few months, that PTSD can go away simply by being in the resonant frequency of the key of C from bees. This is the next step of medicine, when we start to realize we are actually biophysics. We are physics before we are biology, which is to say we are energy before we are a cell.
So I love Zach. So this track, so during the DMT research at Imperial, Pascal Savy was commissioned to make some music for the trip. And this is actually the sounds that I've been listening to for many years whilst having these injections of DMT. And I'm really none of you probably heard this track before, but for me, I start tripping. I start feeling that warmth of the DMT kicking into my system because I'm so imprinted upon by this music, because I've heard it so much in that state space, it starts to bring that state space back. So there is this thing called reminiscence therapy, as I mentioned with dementia. It's this idea of bringing back the state space of experience with sound. And I don't know, how many of you tried DIPT? So DIPT is a novel dissociative, and it only affects your auditory system. So an amazing thing to do at a festival, just to explore your auditory system. But I started a project at Oxford University. We have about 100 artists in the museum, and I'm really a bit of a scout for talent, for music that has function, music that puts you into an altered state. And the challenge to the artist is, can you create a reliable altered state of consciousness in 20 minutes just with sound? So if you're doing some interesting work with sound, please come and talk to me afterwards. We're based at Oxford University, but we do shows in Berlin, in New York, all over the planet. And it's an extremely wild thing to come and just have your consciousness augmented with 5 artists just playing different types of sound that's then put in a stack. So it's like the ingredients, the consciousness ingredients of sound. So let's move on to Umwelt hacking near the end now. So a lobster's brain is located in its throat, its nervous system, in its abdomen, its teeth in its stomach, and its kidneys in its head. It also hears using its legs and tastes with its feet. So just imagine that Umwelt. So an Umwelt is your sensorial system. It's your way of experiencing the world, right? And we have all these other species experiencing the same world extremely differently, because of this, because their umvelts are hugely different. So this is a volcanic snail, a snail with metallic armor. These snails only live in 3 hydrothermal vents in the Indian Ocean. They literally live in acidic, boiling water. Squids and octopi have perfected a form of communication that is both psychedelic and telepathic, an inspiring model for the human communications of the future, from Terence McKenna.
You can barter with birds. If you start feeding a bird and you up the quality of the food that you give the bird will start bringing you back better and better gifts as an exchange for the food that you're giving it.
Some videos over the last couple weeks of ravens where they'll be feeding them, and then eventually the ravens are going to bring them money.
Yes, they'll bring you $20 bills. Like they know that you want.
Like, where are they getting this from?
But how are they that smart? Think about it. Like everyone thinks they're stupid, but they know what humans want. And if you feed them stuff that they want, they will try to bring you back something in return. They'll find a $20 bill on the street. They'll bring it back to you because like they've got an exchange going on with you.
So as Merlin says, and this is talking about fungus, what's it like to be a fungus? If you had no head, no heart, no center of operations, if you could taste with your whole body, if you could take a fragment of your toe or your hair and it would grow into a new you, and hundreds of these new versions could fuse together into some impossibly large togetherness. And when you wanted to get around, you would produce spores, this little condensed part of you that would travel in the air. Let's listen to some frogs. So what's it like to have compound eyes? Imagine having a range of different eyes that you could see through. We imagine how it feels to be a character. Why can't we imagine how the land feels? This artist recorded an entire forest. We know that the earth has a pulse.
He got curious, why do the birds start chirping an hour before sunrise? He found out the chirping of the birds is a frequency that helps open up the plant cell stomata on the bottom of the leaf, and it lets the plant start breathing in the morning. It helps us the alarm clock or wakes the plant up. He found out that that frequency is found in music, classical music, quite a bit. So he started playing classical music to his cornfield. His neighbors thought, un poquito loco a la cabeza, he's a couple fries short of a Happy Meal, but until his corn grew 15 feet tall. And they said, what channel was that you're playing? When he played the music to his squash plants, they produced 5 squash per leaf instead of 1. He played it to his black walnut tree, and it grew twice as fast as normal. Called Sonic Bloom. It's a combination of vitamins for the plant and special frequencies.
So you might have heard this term, nature on the board. And that's generally this idea of somebody appropriating nature and saying this is what nature wants from our corporation. But now I think it's really important that we can have, like I mentioned, the AI tools. Let me just show you them. So this is earthspecies.org, Open Plant. This is plant signaling. Project SETI is sperm whale language, dolphin communication. Some of the first species that we're going to be able to talk to potentially are dolphins and sperm whales. So maybe we can actually have the voice of nature on the board through our AI technologies and machine learning. This for me is a real breakthrough and something I'm very excited about. And also I've created a project called Umwelt Hacking where we attach these prosthetics. So wind whiskers so you can start to feel like a forest, or like octopus so you can feel like an octopus. So come and talk to me afterwards if you want to have one of these boxes to try out these experiments. So no technology involved, just very much analog prosthetic devices, and there's talks about that online. This device is a chi machine, so you can put your ankles in here and it sways you from side to side. And then it's like your whole body starts to sway like a snake. So putting you in a snake body. We also know that that fungi has a language. 15 to 50 words have been identified from the mycelium. And as David Luke says, you know, as a sort of a counterpoint to earthspecies.org, etc. I love how they call it ESP, extrasensory perception, because that's basically what the indigenous shamans and have been attuned to all the time. So of course, maybe we could tune in like the indigenous do to these other kingdoms, but maybe, as always, we will use technology as a shortcut to get there. We now see that there are organic computers made of mushrooms. Maybe the mushrooms aren't too happy about it being used as electrical sort of super channels or whatever. But imagine nature taking over the internet. Imagine nature influencing the technosphere. That's really what I'm talking about with hyperhumanism or hyperhumanism. So to conclude, I'm really interested in this idea of the re-enchantment, or maybe you're already fully enchanted with life. How do we have these visceral felt experiences of a nested ecology in order to protect that ecology? You know, maybe we need to have these experiences. Maybe you're already sensitive enough to have them. And I think the big danger is that we use technology as creatures of comfort and creatures of, you know, convenience. I think the big danger is that the erasure of struggle is the struggle, because comfort kills what the lack of comfort creates. So we need to basically keep our imaginations regenerative. It's not enough to sustain anything anymore. We need to regenerate, because sustaining what's already broken doesn't work. We need to be perceptually flexible and have this ability to shift our perception. So unity and diversity, pluralism represents multiple ways of knowing, multiple ontologies. As I said, a lot of what I'm talking about here today, it's a work in progress. And I think it's all about the hybridity, the transjective. It's about the integral. It's our relationship with otherness or isness, as David mentions. Understanding the role of language and metaphors that we use. How do we describe these states, dimensions? Dimensions is such a problematic term. If you start saying, you know, we have this different relationship with light in these different dimensions. Are there such things as dimensions, or is it all happening in the same place? We are now entering a new frontier by being able to develop peripheral and parallel forms of consciousness, giving us a chance to stretch out and expand the human experience. I wish I could show you, when you are lonely or in darkness, the astonishing light of your own being. So I am creating an Institute for Hyperhumanism with a lot of colleagues. If you're interested and want to know more, or you want to join, or you want to do something with the Museum of Consciousness, please email me at carlhaydensmith@gmail.com. Thank you very much.